Can you give us the latest update from the Vatican? What are they saying about the Pope's overnight condition?
Well, the latest information we got was from last night's medical bulletin. It gives us a summary of what happened every day, and what his condition is. And honestly, they said his condition remains critical. He has suffered no more respiratory crises. However, he remains with a very low platelet count. He had been suffering with anemia, and that is better. He received some blood transfusions, and that condition has improved. However, they also said, and this is something that is quite alarming, I think, given his age and his overall condition, is that there have been initial signs of potential kidney failure. They said that for now that is under control, but one of the big concerns going in, especially given the complexity of the infection that he's fighting, and the sheer amount of medications he's on, is that he's at risk of sepsis. And so that's not language they've used at this point, but certainly the development of the kidneys is not a positive sign in that regard, and we hope that it stays under control.
Now, he is still very much in control of his faculties, it would appear. They talk about the Pope being sitting up out of bed. That was a medical necessity, I believe, to keep him upright. But also he is talking, he's dealing with his officials.
Exactly. So you're exactly right. They said it is essential that he's not laying down all the time. He's been sitting in a chair a lot. And yesterday he went to the chapel near his apartment on the 10th floor of the Gemelli, where he participated in Mass. And, there is no vice pope. There is no deputy pope. So, when he's sick, he continues to manage things. You'll see documents signed from the Gemelli Hospital. In recent days and throughout his hospital stay, he's been meeting with his closest collaborators. I think there have been fewer the last couple of days. I think especially over the weekend, after this respiratory crisis he experienced, he has not been receiving visitors. I don't think even his closest collaborators, they want to make sure he pulls out of this latest crisis before he gets back down to business. But he is still very much in charge.
And he marked the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He says, this was from a statement yesterday, drafted, it appears, by the Pope himself. Tomorrow will be the third anniversary of the large-scale war against Ukraine, a painful and shameful occasion for the whole of humanity. As I reiterate my closeness to the suffering of the Ukrainian people, I invite you to remember the victims of all armed conflicts and to pray for the gift of peace in Palestine, Israel, and throughout the Middle East, Myanmar, Kivu, and Sudan.
Yes, Pope Francis, as he said, he's still in charge. He's still governing. He's signing and writing documents. And, one of the big things that's complicated about his hospital stay is that it's happening during a Jubilee year when he has a lot of events on the calendar. A lot of people coming to Rome, and he wants to write those speeches and all of those messages to be present himself, and so to the people in the way that he can. So when we're hearing him pray for peace, which is something he consistently does every week in his Sunday Angelus address, he prays for peace throughout the world, and he specifically mentions Ukraine and the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine, the war in Gaza. Myanmar is a place he's prayed for consistently, and so these are places that are very close to his heart. And when we see this really is coming from him. He continues to move forward with his priorities, and he continues to try to rally the world towards prayer, not just for himself, but for everybody who is suffering and for all of the victims of armed conflict, which is something that has been particularly close to his heart. Those people have been consistently in his thoughts and in his prayers throughout his papacy, and especially in the last couple of years, that we've seen these more serious conflicts erupt. So that's something that he continues to monitor in the way that he can, even from his hospital bed.
You mentioned earlier there is no deputy pope, no vice pope, but still there's a lot of ordinary bureaucracy to be run by the papal office. Who's doing that kind of work now?
Well, so the Pope has his team of people, in the Vatican that keeps things going, in his absence. He's making all the decisions himself ultimately, but routine administration, you have the Vatican Government, which is, the administrative offices of Vatican City and St. Peter's Basilica. So you have an Italian sister who is going to take charge as of March 1st, who's really running most of the show, Sister Raffaella Petrini. And so routine administration falls to them. It also falls to the Secretary of State. So his closest collaborators there, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is the Secretary of State, and British Archbishop Paul Gallagher, who is basically the Vatican's foreign minister. These guys keep things running, and the head of all Vatican departments. The church continues to live and thrive, and it needs to function, throughout the world. And so the heads of all the Vatican departments who run things here, and who are a point of reference for all the local churches and dioceses around the world,
Now,
still are doing things.
The question of the Pope becoming incapacitated, he is on the record himself as saying he believes the job is for life. But he said, I think I'm remembering this quotation, that's what I'm saying today, but ask me tomorrow. It might be a different answer. But Canon Law 335 states when the Holy See is vacant or completely impeded, nothing changes in the governance of the Church, but there's no explanation or parsing of what completely impeded means, and no alternative method of carrying on.
Well, exactly. That's a big question mark for the Catholic Church. Is what happens in that situation? Things basically stop running. Decisions stop being made. The administrative level and sort of the dicasteries. The departments of the Roman Curia will continue to run at an administrative level, but decisions would simply cease to be made. Pope Francis in the past has said that he has already signed a letter of resignation in the case that he is medically incapacitated, but there's no clear decision. There's no clear criteria for who would be the one to make that call, when to apply that letter, and how and when. So these are all questions that remain, and fortunately we're not at the point yet, where Pope Francis is capacitated in a way that would make that letter feasible. He still is what the Vatican describes, and is repeatedly described as alert, and aware of everything that's happening, So we're not at that point yet. But if we were, it's a complicated place for the Vatican to be in, because there really is no clear rule. I think at some point, I would imagine, the College of Cardinals would be convoked, and they would have to probably make that decision together of whether to apply that letter from Pope Francis. But that's something, again, we're not at that point yet. He remains, in spite of his critical condition and in spite of the many different complications of his current clinical status, he does remain with all of his capacities, and he is still running things. So fortunately, we're not at that point. And hopefully for the church, I'm sure they're all hoping that we don't get there.
Yeah. Now, he is an elderly man anyway at 88, and he is ill. And because he's been immobilized for much of the past few years, he's put on a huge amount of weight. So it's all very challenging. And there's no doubt, no one lives forever. So I'm sure there are those within the church who are jockeying for position, looking at the succession.
That's sort of a perpetual game that happens here. Everyone's sort of perpetually looking at that. And I think since Pope Francis had some more serious health crises and, over the past couple of years, in 2023, he was hospitalized twice, once for bronchitis, which he later just said had been diagnosed in the hospital as a complex pneumonia. So that was also a close call for him. Then he had surgery later that year. So I think the last couple of years, people have been looking at this more intensely. And in terms of who might be a candidate, that's really a very open-ended question, especially, if we are to arrive to a conclave sometime soon. A lot of the cardinals appointed by Pope Francis simply don't know one another. They come from remote countries and dioceses around the world. Many of them have never met one another. Their points of reference have always been the cardinals in Rome. So there's going to be a lot to discuss. I think when they get here, there would be probably a week or so of general congregations meetings before the conclave actually starts. And those are going to be very key, and I think going into any conclave, there really is one question that cardinals have to ask themselves, and that's, do they want continuity with the last papacy or discontinuity? Do they like the way things are going? Do they think it was helpful and good for the church, or do they want to take a different direction?
And I think that
there are several candidates on either side.
Yeah, not all of the cardinals will actually get to vote in the next conclave because of age.
Yeah, so at 80 years old, that's the cutoff for, for cardinals to vote in a conclave. I mean, I think technically they can still be elected. It's extremely unlikely, but they can still be elected, but they cannot vote. They're considered sort of wise elder statesmen. They can give their contributions and they would participate in some of the discussions beforehand, but they cannot vote in a conclave. So what you're looking at right now is a group of about 120 men who would be within the age limit, within the age requirements to participate in a conclave and to be elected pope. The past two popes who've been elected have been, 78, I think, was as Pope Benedict was 78 when he was elected, and Pope Francis in 2013 was 76 when he was elected. So, I think that's sort of the general age range you're looking at, but anything is really possible. John Paul II was elected at 59. So, there really are no hard and fast rules for what they're looking for. It sort of comes down to an evaluation of the current status of things at an ecclesial level, but also geopolitical level, and what sort of are the big issues that they feel like need addressed and who can do it. So for that, again, the question of continuity and discontinuity is going to be key. Should we get to a conclave, but even if we don't get to one soon, whenever there is one, that's going to be the major question mark.
Okay. Elise Ann Allen, senior correspondent with The Crux, thank you very much for joining us.